Thank you, Trevor. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Sage Cole. It is Tuesday, August 8th, 2023, 9 a.m. And my lecture today is titled, "The Word Made Flesh, How Wisdom Grows in Us." When I was looking at the weeks of Freiburg, I was having trouble trying to figure out what the difference was between week 1 and week 2. They both have to do, rain is the difference. The first week is the Bible in us and how we're in the Bible, and then the next week is the holiness of the Word. So it got me thinking about the difference, or what differences exist between the Bible and the Word. And I'm guessing we all maybe have different answers to that question of what the difference is between the Bible and the Word, especially as Swedenborgians of different traditions. We often use the expression, the Word, to refer to the Bible, right? We open the Word at the beginning of our services, and we often use that. And in some of the branches of our tradition, we use the term the Word to refer to even Swedenborg's writings. And as you heard this morning in chapel, we hear the expression the Word spoken of in reference to Jesus and Jesus' being and presence in the world. And as we might guess, when Jesus lived, there did not exist such a thing in the current form that we experience it, called the Bible. And certainly Swedenborg's writings were not yet around. So when Jesus is talking about, when we hear about the Word in reference to Jesus, what is this Word? So I want to read it one more time from the Gospel of John. And I'm just leaving out the portion about John the Baptist. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood, or of the will of the flesh, or of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So I wonder, before I give you my thoughts on the matter, does anybody have something they want to share about their understanding of the Word? Anybody want to take a jump? Maybe it's early in the morning. Maybe you'd rather hear my musings first. Go ahead.
Well, because the word and language is speaking and communication, I often think that the word is more a verb than a noun.
Anyone else want to share a thought? Or a word about the Word? For me, and especially over the last few years, I've come to really think about the Word as something is sort of like, perhaps, like if you were going to use the analogy of the Word is to the Bible as perhaps like our DNA is to our bodies. maybe. All of these are very, don't get too attached to any of these metaphors. But that the Word is this reality that always existed, that was from the beginning of time. And in the life of Christ, we see that Word enfleshed in a human person. Jesus was a human person. It's so important for us to remember that Jesus was a human person with a body just like ours. And this human person was raised within the Jewish tradition, had certainly many of the books of Scripture that we are familiar with, the law and the prophets, but did not have a Bible like we currently carry around. But he had the teachings of the Jewish tradition, but then he had the enfleshed experience of embodying this deeper word. Sometimes I like to think about the word, it's speech, perhaps it's divine intelligence. You know, we hear in the story of Genesis, sort of God spoke and creation came into being. That creation kind of speaks of God and is God speaking out. And what made Jesus different, the reason there is a Christian church and that we are all gathered here, is that something about this human being received the depth of that word, and his whole life came into alignment with that word, so that he lived a divine life. He lived as God on the earth and showed us what that God-like living would be like. And what are some of the ways Jesus lived on the earth? Maybe you don't need the microphone. If it's short, I'll repeat it. What are some ways that Jesus lived that you learned about in Sunday school? Simply. Jesus lived very simply. He didn't have a crown. He did not hold any position of power or status. He lived very simply. He lived communally. He just kind of roams around and hangs with people, doesn't he? He just roams around, visits people's homes. He's alone every once in a while. He takes his breaks, but most of the time he's with his friends and the crowd. So he lives in community with other people, simply. What else was Jesus like?
It's plausible to believe he started out as a young person to be a rabbi and was learning how to be a teacher.
Mm-hmm. He did study, yeah, he was someone who studied the tradition. He studied the law and the prophets. He spoke in the synagogue. So he was out wandering a lot of his life, but he did spend time in study and learning, yes, and in teaching.
A loving honesty.
A loving honesty. Yeah, we certainly don't have stories of him lying. Even when his death was on the line, he was completely himself and loving and honest. He was a healer. Yeah, he healed people. He listened to their need and he responded, bringing healing. So something about the way in which he was able to receive this divine life gave him great power to be of use to the people around him in his own life upon the earth, and then, as we can see, great power to continue to influence generations, millions, thousands, so many people. And it was this word that was in him, that he was. Do you think the word is in us? Hugh.
Define the word as it says is divine truth.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be something of divine truth in us
Mm-hmm.
in order for us, even if we don't believe it,
Mm-hmm.
it gives us life.
Divine truth gives us life.
And it was life, and the life was the light of men,
Mm-hmm.
of people.
So that light, that was the light of people, right? The light that was in him was also the light of all people.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is something that I've come to believe very deeply more recently, that Jesus was a human being just like us. And then he received and welcomed in this divine life. And as Swedenborg teaches us, we are following a very similar process. Swedenborg makes the point of differentiating them, that Jesus went through this process that we call the glorification, and we go through this process that we call regeneration. But they move along very similar lines, and they're headed towards a similar end. That we too have within us this divine light, this divine wisdom, divine truth, and have the ability, have the call, that our purpose for being is to discover and live that divine light in just the same way that Jesus did. Now, clearly, the history of Christianity is one of varied results in terms of our ability to really live that divine life. But one of the things I'm wondering about is the way in which if we think of the Word as the Bible, if we think of the Word as the teachings that we have about Jesus, I really am wondering, how does that divine light wake up in us? What are the means by which we come to know the truth that is within us? And as Swedenborgians, my suspicion is we would say one of the means is the Scripture, that the Bible stories teach us about this process and help us to see ourselves in this process, help us to identify kind of where we are on the journey of awakening to our own power and our own inner knowing, that it has the ability to wake us up into that. And that's why we open the Bible at the beginning of our worship. That's why we study it. That's what drew Swedenborg to deep study of the Scriptures. And we tell this beautiful story. We see that in the Scriptures is this story of human development, moving from a natural life to a divine life. And to me, that's the heart of our tradition. What's so beautiful is that we can see that we are all on this journey. And I'm going to say "and" a lot and not "but," because I'm trying not to. I think there's so many ways to wake up that divine life. So many ways. And understanding is different than living, right? We can understand things conceptually in our minds, and they cannot yet be actually a part of our experience. Think about, you could study everything, you could know everything about Italy, but until you actually go to Italy, it's just concepts. We can study everything we want about any topic, but until it actually becomes a part of who we are, or we have the lived experience, it's just ideas. And even beliefs have a limited use. We can believe something to be true, but then we can live differently. And I know I'm very conscious of, for a long time, I've believed God is love. I've believed that I am, here to love. I've believed all kinds of things about God. I've believed in divine, and from Swedenborg's teachings, I've believed in divine providence. But then sort of in the day-to-day moments, I haven't trusted in divine providence. I haven't, I've condemned myself in many instances and not believed that I deserved love or forgiveness. And my suspicion is that a lot of us live in that tension, or that a lot of humankind lives in that tension, where we profess a lot of beliefs, and that religion is one of those places where we have lots of high ideals, and yet we don't have, and in some ways, Christians, we don't even really expect any of us to be like Jesus, right? Jesus was Jesus, and he was the best. And we kind of look to Jesus as this ideal, but we expect that we will never live up to that ideal, that we couldn't love in that same way that he loved, because he was God, and we're just human beings. But I don't know. I'm questioning that. I think Jesus was inviting us to be like him. That was the central call of his message, was to be as I am, to love as I love, to love each other as I love you, to step into this new way of being where you know yourself to be deeply loved as the Father loves me, I love you, where we know ourselves to be created upon this earth just like every other creature and loved, and that we know ourselves to have this divine truth within us, to have a source of wisdom, a fountain of wisdom that we don't access primarily by going to the library or to seminary or to teachings on the outside, but that we actually primarily access on the inside. And if books and wisdom and teachers are useful to us, they're useful to us because they help us to awaken that inner knowing. And that's actually what happens when we learn something. We're not being taught from without, but we're being awakened to what we already know to be true within. And that this is the Word. It was from the beginning of time, before anything was made, that Word was there. And it's still around so many millennia later. And that it infuses all of the wisdom teachings of the world. You know, we look to the Bible and we have this wonderful science of correspondences, art of correspondences that Swedenborg revealed for us, this wonderful insight into to how we can read the Bible as the story of this word. And that's beautiful and wonderful. And one of my concerns is that we sometimes believe, well, we have to have the Bible first to then know the Word, but which comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, is the story of growth and development, the story of coming from a state of innocence through all the trials of life back to a state of innocence with wisdom, is that human journey, that life journey that Jesus went through, that we are invited to go through? To me, that's the most important thing. That's the vital thing. And that Swedenborg's vision and his work and his mission was to help us to recognize that. The primacy of regeneration happening in all people, in all traditions, in all religions, no matter, you know, the primacy of the simple act of love, the primacy of a life of kindness, the primacy of knowing ourselves to be this divine life and to have this divine life in us. That's what Jesus lived and showed us about, and that's also what we are called to. This doesn't discount the usefulness of the scriptures. It doesn't discount the usefulness of looking to the Bible to help us to find ourselves and to see where we are on the journey. And, you know, it can be a useful tool. And I wonder if there is, like anything also that's, you know, things can be useful and they can be not useful. They can become, everything has a positive and a negative correspondence. And I think we can certainly see how that's true for the Bible over the course of history, that for some, the Bible has been this beautiful document that has helped people to awaken to their higher life and to live in, you know, Martin Luther King proclaiming it from the mountaintop, you know, it has infused our culture with power and meaning. And on the other side, many, many, many people and many groups have taken the Bible and used it to condemn and to hate, used it to separate themselves from others, and not been transformed into this higher life, but instead hidden in its pages or become divided from others. And I think as a tradition, this is my question, and I'm looking forward to talking with all of you about this, because it's a real question that I hold right now. In our tradition, we have the blessing of this very open faith that does understand that all life is beautiful, and that all human beings are invited to this higher life. And we have a faith that has a lot of books and a lot of words associated with it, and some very, clear descriptions and doctrines and understandings that can be liberating. And I'm sure we all know people, beautiful Swedenborgians, who studied this and lived this, and their lives were gorgeous, and some of us are those people. And all of those teachings can also be, they can keep us separate from each other. And I know I'm living this and struggling with this in real time in my church, because there's only so many humans that want to get together and read these books. But there's a lot of humans who are seeking to grow in love. There's a lot of humans that are seeking to live into a new way of living where kindness is first. And I wonder, and that's also been kind of the two branches of the church, that there's a tradition of Swedenborg. There's a Swedenborgian tradition that's very tied to the words of Swedenborg, and then there's sort of the tradition that of all those like famous New Church visionaries, people who were inspired by Swedenborg's works, but then were inspired to go off and live useful lives in the wider world and in the wider community. And to me, as a church, this is a nexus, a creative tension that we are living in, and that I am very actively wondering about, because I love sitting in basements and studying Swedenborg's writings. It's all there, everything I ever want to think about is in those books. But it's also all around us in the world. Another piece to this that I find very engaging, and I'll be interested to hear people's thoughts on this. And I talked about it a bit last week when I was sharing this moment we are in history. That if the purpose of the spiritual life is for us to, I'm going to suggest that the purpose of the spiritual life is for the Word to become flesh in us. That the purpose of all of our lives is to be who we are. So to be faithful to the Word that wishes to be spoken through us, the life that's calling to be led, and that life is a life of kindness, and it could be all kinds of things. It could, that we each are called to a different kind of life, and as we go along our path, we get better and better at, hopefully, at listening to that and to expressing that in the world. And that being the case, what's really of vital importance is our ability to listen to ourselves and to speak from our experience. And one of my questions, I think, for us as individuals and then as a denomination and as a species at this current moment, or one of my suggestions, is that wisdom, or the Word, or this divine intelligence that we're all being created from, and that we can become more and more aligned to as we grow, that we only can access it, that it's only expressed, and maybe that's too harsh, maybe that's too extreme, but that it is expressed when we speak for ourselves, from our own experience. And this is my, AI is like going to take over the world, or is already. And my suggestion is that when we are just teaching what we've been told, when we are just speaking what someone else has told us about, but that we haven't actually made our own yet, we're kind of acting like computers. My suspicion is that that's sort of been what humans have been doing. Like before computers, we were the computer. We were the computers. And that it's been useful, We've needed to carry forward teaching, so we've needed to learn from our master and then share it with our disciples and let it go on. And that much of that learning, not all, certainly some of it has come from people's lived experience, but a lot, is, I've learned about this, I heard about this, now I'm going to tell you, and now I'm going to tell you. if we're only conveying what we've learned but not what we've lived, we're not much different than AI. The AI will be able to do that for us, so we don't have to keep doing that. It's not as useful anymore. Perhaps it was for a time so that things could be carried forward, but now, if you want to know about the correspondences of water, as Swedenborg taught, AI will be able to tell us. We'll be able to get any bit of, and we already can in some ways, get any bit of knowledge we want at a touch of a button. We all are carrying around computers that can give us that information. So our purpose is different than a computer. And I think for us clergy, this is a question, because clergy, preachers, in large part, are taught the tradition, and then we're conveying the tradition. And that part of the puzzle may not be as important anymore. What may be more important for us preachers is our work of living the tradition, of being changed ourselves, and then of sharing that lived experience with others. Jesus, he preached in the synagogue, he did quote the teachings. It's not that we can't ever read from the Bible or anything, but the primary work that he did in the world was to be a human being and in relationship with other human beings, and to be healing and loving and eating and to be himself. That was the life that transformed. And in doing that, he responded to the moment. He dealt with what he was crucified. That was the course of things. And as I've studied, I've been very interested in kind of the Jesus-like figures of our more recent history, like MLK or Gandhi, or people who have helped to change the world. And often they will say, it was just what I had to do. It wasn't that they sought out to save the world. They were in their lives, living their lives, and conscious of the needs around them and responding to them. And in so doing, called to incredibly heroic actions. And my suggestion is that all of us are too. Maybe we won't be called to free India, but we have no idea what we may be called to do, just in where we are planted in our lives, in the divine truth, the word that is in us, flowing in us, and the life around us. And as a tradition, I'm wondering this question too, as a church. For a long time, the primary work of the church, and I know the mission of the FNCA, is to convey the doctrines of the New Jerusalem, to convey the doctrines of Swedenborg. And I'm glad I'm glad we've been doing that. That's why I'm here. That's why this place is here. It's why there's much goodness that has come from that work. And if we're just conveying the doctrines, but not conveying the real impact they have had on us, or the life that is flowing through us, something's missing. And my sense is that this divine truth, it can speak through geometry, it can speak through shapes, it can speak through words, it can speak through poetry, it can speak through art, it can speak through Buddhism and Christianity, and it can speak through science. It's speaking everywhere. We know this. That's a huge part of our faith, is to know that God is, and God is speaking. And I believe over this, hopefully, I don't know how much longer I have on this planet, but over the next course of my life in this church and in this world, my sense is that we are called to be attentive to all of that speaking. And it may mean getting to the heart of Swedenborg's message and living it, and letting go a little bit, potentially, of some of the words or some of the books, and that might be sad and hard. And maybe there's a way to keep them, but to just not put them in our front of our faces. Maybe we just have to have them over here. When I spoke at Almont, the best feedback I got was someone said there were many instances when you could have said but and you said and I'm really trying to keep saying and, because I don't think any of this means we have to get rid of anything, really. But are we willing to welcome in new things in our buildings and in our spaces? Are we really willing to hear how the new church has been emerging around us and in other people? And hear from each other. Are we willing to speak from our own experience and be vulnerable in that way with each other? It's a lot easier sometimes to be a computer and to have been taught the doctrine and then teach the doctrine. But my sense is that for some, that what I'm speaking is not something new. I think George was an example of this. He shared all kinds of stories of his own life. He sought to make this teaching real and fleshed, and that's the only thing that matters. If you never pick up Swedenborg, but you're kind, you've got it. You've found it. And that kindness, and I'm going to try to end it here and shift to some conversation. That kindness, what I have experienced, what I will share, what I have experienced is that kindness, it does come from taking all these great concepts that we preach about God and actually realizing they're true, and that we can take them into our lives every day. That we are love, that we can be kind not just to other people but to each other, to ourselves, forgiving ourselves when we make mistakes and moving on and just being in the work of loving each other. That this is the call of the spiritual life, is for this word to become flesh. To not worship Jesus as this figure, this unattainable figure up on a pedestal that we worship and we believe we get things from, because that's the doctrine that we Swedenborgians know is not true. We don't accept Jesus as our personal savior and then think everything's taken care of. All of that is making Jesus into an idol. But that we live like Jesus did. And this doesn't mean we mimic him either. It means that we love as we are. We accept the love that's in us. We accept that that's enough and that it's going to be okay and that it's important in this world. That the world needs this love, this simple love. The world doesn't need any more, doers. The world needs this simple love. We know that. We know that at this moment. It's been debunked that the salvation of the world rests on the geniuses and the ones that are kind of stepping out there and doing the big things. The world needs that simple love. That was Helen Keller's life, which is why she's at the center of. She's the one that is helping me, is teaching me. She's a new church example. It's the small acts of love. And that this process of regeneration, it's the real deal. It's real. It's not just something we read about in a book. It's what is, God is growing us, just like God is growing the trees and the animals and the plants. And that process of growing is growing into love. We have something to bring. So I'll just reiterate my questions so that we can sit with them a little bit. The word is from the beginning. It lives in the Bible as we have it now, and Swedenborg helped us to excavate that. But perhaps it also lives in the trees and in the natural world. Maybe it's living in your own artwork or your own creative efforts. There's so much beauty. Yes, there's lots of beauty in the Bible, and there's a lot of beauty a lot of other places too. And that vulnerability, being attentive to how divine truth is manifesting in our own lived experience, being honest when we're screwing up, being honest about our failings, being honest about our passion and our joy and our hopes, that's where truth and wisdom lie. That world vitally needs that wisdom. AI can't access that wisdom. AI can only repeat wisdom from the past, knowledge. We need to access that wisdom. We need to let it be free, and we need to share it with each other. I really think there's I think Brené Brown and the vulnerability movement, I think we're still it's still new, and there's still probably some people that are like, that's girl stuff, but vulnerability is honesty. That's all it is. It's honesty. It's being truthful, even when others disagree. And that's the divine stuff. And at this moment in our evolution, it's for everybody. It's not just for the brave ones. I think it's the call of all of us to let ourselves be who we are and aligned with that truth. And I imagine my sense is at any moment, no matter what's happening in your life, no matter what you've been through, no matter how much you think you've failed or you think you've succeeded, that there's something in being honest with all of that. There's wisdom that you need and that other people need. And possibly that the church could be a place where we do that together, that the church could be a place where we honor that truth and honor it in each other. And I don't know what that looks like, because I don't know that it looks like a preacher up in the front with the robe on. I don't know. There's some sticky places with our tradition, with the tradition of church, that I do feel concerned are giving the wrong message. And it doesn't mean that goodness has not come from that model. It has, and it can be beautiful. And I think it can be even more beautiful. And perhaps that's what the call of this moment is as a denomination, is to think about how much more beautiful could we possibly be? How much more creative could we possibly be? And how much more could we make room for each other to be of use in the world and to be a space where the word is made flesh among us. So those are my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours.
You. I am Hugh Odner, and the closing words of your talk, you were expressing doubt about the forms of worship we now have. Mm-hmm. And it brings to mind that the forms of worship we now have are rather limited to what they will be in the coming ages. Mm-hmm. And it says the Lord loves variety, and that there in heaven there are many different churches and also different doctrines. Yeah. They all have a central core. They look to the Lord. Yeah. I like to put my hand.
We need to hear you, though.
And maybe if I hold it this way. And as I see it, we go into the other world. We will be seeking out that form of worship that we are already in or developing here. Mm-hmm. And it talks about some people wandering from one place to another. So some of us will go into it immediately and says, this is spiritual home. For others, we'll wander here and we'll wander there, and so eventually we'll hone in on it and says, this is where I belong. Mm-hmm. And people will recognize it. And it may not have the formal robes and things like that that we have here. But already in this world, there are people who love the formality and need the structure, and that's their heaven. And there are people who like the let's sit around and talk type of worship. That's their heaven. So I see an almost unlimited variety in worship that we haven't yet even gotten to. I'm hesitant to criticize our forms of worship because there are some people that is what they love, but other forms are developing. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Susanna. I wanted to share that, one of the things I'm most grateful to this church for is it helped me find that who I really am is a chaplain. That's who I am. It's what I feel, where I feel most useful. And one of my chaplain visits was with a fellow in Rhode Island, a church organist. And he had worked for 60 years in, dozens of denominations. So I thought, okay, here's the guy I want to ask, what is the best part of a sermon? Because he'd heard so many from so many different people. And it took a while. He paused, and he said, I want to know the minister cares about me. Out of all the truths that he'd heard, what mattered most was the love that he felt. Interestingly, after we conversed a little more, and he found out what tradition I was in, he said, "You don't happen to know George Dole, do you?" He had been at Yale with George Dole. He dug out the picture and showed me where he was. But I said, "Did you know him well?" He said, "No, I didn't know him well, but one weekend his parents visited, and they shone like the sun." He met Louis and Anita, and he just loved them. He thought they were wonderful people. And so he was interested in what the tradition was about because of them, because George was just 20 at the time. But just to know that the real heart of a sermon is to show people you love them, and that's what chaplaincy is, and that's the heart of it for me.
I wasn't sure where you was going. You ended up very nicely, though, because I was thinking, you can't read until you know the alphabet. You can't read until you know the syllables and how they go together and the sounds. So you really, I'm not sure how you live without some instruction. And the Bible's, to me, is so important. And I grew up in a very Bible-related church. It wasn't fundamentalist. There was no fear. It was Bible stories and doing good and loving. And I thought that was very well. That was kind of how it went until I found the new church. And then I don't want to say I was enlightened, because I don't think I've been enlightened yet, but I understood my journey much better after I came into the new church. So I really like the writings, and I think they've served a real purpose, and I'm not sure they're done serving a purpose, because people do need instruction to live. But I wholly, completely agree. Jesus was humble. And until we are humble enough to share all our experiences with each other, we don't grow. And it's a very hard journey. I believe in all these things, but it's very difficult. And thank you.
Thanks, Martha.
I have 7 minutes. My name's Erin. I really enjoyed your talk, and it reminded me also that I have recently come to terms with the fact that it's not so much of a building, but a surrendering. And I think that that is equally scary and freeing at the same time, because because just like what you said, once you grow up saying, or you understand the aspect that we are love, but we don't necessarily embody it because it's so scary, like jumping off that almost of a cliff of being like, I am love and I will be okay, and I do know, that divine wisdom, and it is all within me. And I feel like oftentimes we are running away from pain, and that creates the suffering. And once we understand that pain is inevitable in life, and that it has nothing to do with who we are, and how perfect we are on the inside, made in God's image, and the embodiment of love, that's when we become free. And it's all about surrendering to who we already are. And yeah, I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you, Erin.
Aaron, I'm going to add to your talk. This is Lee. I think another part of that is knowing that you are worthy to accept that love. And I think so many of us, I'm including myself, so many of us feel that we have to live up to this ideal of who Jesus was or is, and we're not going to make it. We're not that person. I am not that person. So I think we have to acknowledge within ourselves that we are worthy of receiving that love. We are worthy of sharing that love. And I think we fall, or I'm not going to say we, I fall back so many times of, well, I'm not capable of that. And so with Aaron standing at the cliff of surrendering, you are taking off the life preservers, and you're just going for it, because the life preservers of your life have been holding on to those images of what you think you are, and the labels and the responsibilities you think you have on this earth, and that's what's holding us back.
Yeah. Right, and we surrender, and then we just have to keep surrendering. So I definitely fell into the trap of, I'm surrendering, and so now I should just be angelic. But no, you surrender, and then something else rises up. And I think we don't give Jesus, he knocked over tables in the temple. He got mad, he was a infleshed being. And I think we have created the kind of an idol of Jesus too, that it will all look a certain way. Yeah.
As I don't remember, yesterday I think it was yesterday, they were discussing different parables or Bible stories that kind of triggered them. And one that, as a child, I remember hearing that Jesus, when his mother, they were at the wedding, and she's like, quickly, turn the water, and as growing from a child to a mother, and I'm like, I have different aspects, like, he got annoyed with her.
He did, yeah.
Wow, he had some, attitude there.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
This is Susanna again. I just want to lift up for us a phrase that Kent shared with us last week about our journey is to be imperfectly loving imperfection.
Yeah.
Last week, this is Nancy. Last week at the Flames, we studied the story of the walk to Emmaus. And this really jumped out at me because Jesus wasn't always gentle.
Yeah.
And so he's walking along the road to Emmaus, and the two disciples, they still don't know who he is.
Yeah.
And he says to them, how foolish you are.
Yeah.
And how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared.
Yeah.
Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?
Yeah.
makes fun of them.
Yeah, yeah,
You know,
yeah.
it's like you're fools.
Duh, yeah.
Duh.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And as we become ourselves, we're gonna, who knows what we're gonna do? We might have to, exactly, we sometimes have to speak strongly, sometimes gently, and we may, who knows what he said, maybe he was like, oh man, I should have been nicer to them. Who knows what, we don't know what Jesus's, all of his inner process was, we don't. We make assumptions, and we think it's all perfect and holy, and that we're the screwed up ones. But it's much more both.
We're at time now,
Great.
so thank you, Sage, for
Thank
your
you.
for your talk.
Thank you.
And we'll be back.